I have said not once, but many times, that I have seen war and that I hate war. I hope the United States will keep out of this war.
It was a nice day. Nothing to calm to me. As soon as I got off duty, I was planning on going to the beach.
You're hearing a voice that's never been broadcast before. He's a US sailor whose story you won't know. But he and hundreds of African Americans like him will be thrust into one of the most pivotal moments in history. A day that turns the tide of the Second World War.
I could hear a rumbling noise. At that time, I didn't know what it was. I had no idea. We were about to start a war.
More than 8 million people of color served with the Allies during the Second World War.
Troops from India, African Americans, Asians.
My grandfather was one of these men, a soldier of color whose role in the war has never been honored.
These soldiers have really genuinely been hidden from history.
Now, by tracking down their descendants and unearthing forgotten archive, we're going to restore these unsung heroes to their rightful place.
They weren't supposed to write things that were going down when they were in the service, but he did it anyway. He brought us proof of what actually happened.
This series reevaluates 4 of the greatest battles of World War II and asks, who were these men?
These were guys that went above and beyond the call of duty.
What was their role in the most significant war of modern times?
Their stories deserve to be elevated and not erased.
And how do their experiences shape our modern world? Spring 1940, and 60,000 American sailors begin heading to the U.S. Naval Base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Aboard the fleet are more than 1,000 black sailors, all working below deck.
Black recruits sign up to try to defend their country, but when they get into the service, they're treated with hostility. The military branches, including the Navy, had a quota system that limited what % of Black Americans could join each branch of the military. They didn't believe Black people had the intelligence, courage, bravery to be able to serve in combat roles. Black Americans could only serve as mess attendants aboard these Navy ships, where their job was to wait on white officers. They essentially did the cooking and cleaning. It was some of the lowliest work on the ship.
Among these new recruits are 3 men whose stories were erased or denied for decades. We found rare interviews with them brought to life here for the first time. On the USS West Virginia, we have Doris Miller. His white officers don't know that he has the strength and courage that will save lives. With him is George Bland. He's from a family of 7 in Virginia. And nearby, on the USS Utah, is Clark Simmons. Clark is just 17 when he leaves his home state of Texas, where his descendants still live.
My grandfather, the man, the provider, the protector, the patriarch. This article from the Honolulu Star Bulletin quotes Clark Simmons being a Navy mess attendant stationed on the USS Utah. My grandfather, he was always Papa to me. I always looked up to him. I was closer to him than I was to my own father. But I think he held a lot of things very close to his chest.
What you'll hear now is Clark's voice, recorded when he was 77 years old. It's from only one of 2 recordings of him and has never been broadcast.
I was born in Beaumont, Texas. My father was killed at a very young age.
When I asked my grandfather about his father, he told me that he was lynched. He didn't elaborate. He didn't say he saw it, but my grandfather would have been 8 or 9 years old when it happened.
I sort of was the surrogate father to my 3 sisters. It wasn't a Great Depression. I went in the Navy in order to send some money home.
My father wanted to make sure that his family was provided for. But he didn't agree with the way that African Americans were being treated.
They told you that going to the Navy was a utopia. The sky's the limit, the things that you can do. Never saying that you were going to be making beds and shining shoes. Never saying that you're going into a segregated Navy.
Segregation of the armed forces was more than just the idea that Black and white men might sleep in different barracks. Because you have to remember what the military symbolized. It was about honor, it was respect, it was citizenship. It was quite literally currency that was reserved for white men. Segregation is a way of saying to Black people, you are not deserving of those things.
At the same time, for white sailors reaching Hawaii, it must have felt like paradise.
Hawaii brought about a kind of false security. The kind of patrols that the American Navy was doing out of Hawaii was minimal. The American Navy is not prepared for what is coming. The United States is not involved in the European War, but the Pacific was very unsettled. Japan are now partners with the Nazis of Germany, who are this juggernaut that is pushing across Europe. And now the Japanese are invading parts of Southeast Asia and planning to move across the Pacific.
The United States is building up their fleet in the Pearl Harbor area as a defensive measure to sort of keep the Japanese at bay.
Moving the Pacific Fleet to Pearl Harbor was immediately interpreted by Japan as a direct threat to their operations in Asia. And they decided that the Pacific Fleet must be annihilated.
Over the next 2 hours, African-American sailors will save lives and defend their country. Yet, in the years ahead, what really happened here will be reshaped, their heroic actions dismissed and erased.
Early that morning at sunrise, the Japanese Navy had launched over 183 planes towards the island of Oahu. All have specific targets. The time is now about 7:45. Surprise has been achieved.
As Pearl Harbor swings into view that morning, one Japanese pilot manages to take a photo. That's the USS Utah right there, with Clark Simmons on board. His ship is among those that the Japanese hit first.
I could hear planes and machine guns. I just didn't know what was happening.
No footage exists of what happened inside the ships, but the Pearl Harbor attack has been reenacted time and time again. And a year on, the US War Office dramatizes events for an American audience. But something's missing from the footage. And that's the people of color. Men like Clark Simmons.
I felt the reverberation. The ship shook. The torpedo had gone through into the Utah.
Clark Simmons immediately scrambles to his battle station, which unfortunately is below deck. Because of the restrictions on African Americans in combat, most of the work that they do is below deck, which means that Clark Simmons and other African Americans would have been running right into the heart of the danger.
Daniel Martinez heard it firsthand from Clark Simmons when he met him and interviewed him in 1998.
He said that was the thing that was just terrifying. You're below deck, the ship comes first, and they're now closing off areas where there are sailors still in those compartments.
Less than 10 minutes before the Utah is hit, on the other side of Ford Island, mess attendants Doris Miller and George Bland are on the morning shift. George Bland joins the Navy aged 19, but it isn't until much later in his life that he opens up about his experiences. Speaking in 2002, his words are broadcast here for the first time.
Black fellas were sort of like a butler to the officers. Some people treat dogs better than do human beings.
When he joined the Navy, 1940, Dad thought there might be some hope for African Americans. But once on board this first ship, he found that the hatred, the resentment, the expected servitude for a young Negro mess steward was literally off the chain. He could not breathe, turn left or right without someone saying, hey, in, do this, pick up that. Dad had several run-ins with fellow sailors on the ship, and he ended up in the brig.
The Navy did a lot of things to the black sailors. They were mistreated, misused.
My father told me a white sailor said we should keep you down here in chains just like we did your ancestors. told me he was glad that he was locked up, because he probably would have been lynched on the ship right then. It struck a nerve in Dad because he realized that what was the difference now than then.
Even though they were maintaining racial segregation on the ships, keep in mind that everyone is working together, living together in close quarters. There is a concern by the U.S. Navy that African Americans serving on ships in large numbers is going to create racial tension and also have the possibility for violence.
For George and other black sailors on West Virginia, these are conditions that could crush all hope. But one man proves he can endure them and still rise up. And that man is Doris Miller.
1940, Uncle Doris, he went aboard the USS West Virginia, and so that's the ship that he was aboard. He was only 20 years old when he went to the Navy.
Oh, wow.
Still
He
just...
was young.
Yeah. My Uncle Doris exhibited being an amazing athlete. He had the build, he had the speed, he was the champion. His boxing career on the ship showed that you could break that chain and show them I'm so much more than the title that you're giving me.
My dad and the Negro sailors on board would look at Doris Miller. He's strong, he's a good fighter. That type of spirit of standing up for who you are, it infected Dad's character. And he said, if he can do it, I can do it too.
It is that fighting spirit that will save countless lives when under fire, even the lives of those who look down on him now.
Within minutes of the USS Utah being hit, the Japanese planes are swinging around, descended on Battleship Row. Possibly as many as 4 to 5 torpedoes strike the USS West Virginia with Doris Miller and George Bland aboard.
I could hear a rumbling noise. I was thinking, why would the Navy send in her planes on a Sunday morning? I said, oh my goodness, something hit the ship.
Dad said it was as if the ship went up in the air and sat down. He didn't know what was happening.
The battleship Tennessee was hit by a bomb, and fragments from that went towards the West Virginia, and one of those pieces of metal disemboweled Captain Mervyn Bennion.
Across the fleet, men of all colors put their lives on the line to help their fellow sailors. And that includes Doris Miller.
My Uncle Doris, he was ordered up to deck to help his captain, to pull him to safety.
But fires were now reaching up towards the captain.
I could only imagine his heart racing, adrenaline running.
While the attack on Pearl Harbor ramps up, all 3 of our heroes' lives are now under threat. In the heat of battle, Miller's heroic actions are noticed.
The executive officer, Hillenkotter, wrote down a comment. He said, Doris Miller, mess attendant, 2nd class, United States Navy, was instrumental in hauling people through the oil and water along the quarterdeck, thereby unquestionably saving the lives of a number of people who might have otherwise been lost.
On the other side of Ford Island, the USS Utah is sinking rapidly.
Clark Simmons was trapped below decks.
You're in a state of shock. A lot of water came in.
My dad said to me that he was scared, but he had the will to live. And I think when you have a will to live, you do anything necessary to make this happen.
I took off going up to where I knew there was a way of getting off the ship. And I ran into the chief engineer, the communication officer, and they followed me to the captain's cabin. The ship was beginning to list. Everything was beginning to break loose. We knew that it was just a matter of time before the ship was going to sink.
My grandfather told me each person had to go out of a porthole in order to survive that ship sinking.
There were 2 white officers with me. Each one of us took a port.
The white officers, they always came first. Had there been 3 white officers in him versus 2 white officers in him, he said he wouldn't have made it.
When I heard him tell that story, it just gave me a doorway into what the protocol of race was.
After we went out the port, the lines were beginning to part, and I jumped into the water.
Within 11 minutes, the Utah has capsized. It's captured here on film. Clark makes it to Ford Island, but others aren't so lucky.
What I'm imagining are the bodies that were floating in the water. And, you know, how do you deal with that? How do you forget that?
The West Virginia, where Doris is stationed, has now been under attack for 15 minutes.
The aerial assault is relentless. And in the midst of this chaos, it becomes clear that the West Virginia is going to have to start fighting back.
Yet no one expects Doris, a mess attendant, to be one of the first to return fire.
No black men were allowed near those guns. But when the moment presented itself, my Uncle Doris, he knew what to do. He knew to step up, aim, and just fire.
No audio recording of Doris survives, but we do know what he was thinking, because he gives a newspaper interview less than a year later. We're using an actor's voice to voice his words.
I just thought I better start hitting those planes before they hit me. I forgot all about the fact that I and other Negroes can only be mess men and are not taught how to man an anti-aircraft gun. Without knowing how I did it, it must have been God's strength and Mother's blessing.
It's a remarkable story of heroism that was unprecedented in the history of the U.S. Navy. His job as mess attendant was to do laundry and to cook. Yet on that morning, he does what it takes to join the battle, to help defend his crew, to help defend himself, to help defend his country.
For white servicemen, this must have been a brutal contradiction to what they thought about the capabilities of black sailors.
But for the US Navy in 1941, heroes come in only one color. And witness reports begin to dismiss Doris's actions, starting with his effectiveness on the gun.
I would term it rather wild, so I doubt he hit anything. I certainly did not see him shoot down a plane.
For me, it shows how quick Navy officials were to erase Doris's heroism, an injustice that will still be felt decades later. Right now, the West Virginia, seen here, is surrounded by smoke, and George Bland and Doris Miller are still on board.
Father saw the fellow sailors being burned because the oil and the fire and the water was singeing them. And then my dad knew he had to do something to help.
In the minutes before fires engulfed the West Virginia, George Bland risked his life to pull men from the fire, extending help even to those who had insulted and abused him.
We pull guys from down below in the water up, pull them up, lay them in the blanket. It's good to move them, and the fresh, we just move on the body. There wouldn't be any eyebrows or eyelashes.
And I said, Dad, these are the same people that called you names and made you feel badly? He said, these were God's children. And it broke my heart that I couldn't do anything to help them, to save them.
The order comes to evacuate the ship. Now, George has no choice but to save himself.
As I looked around, I could see fighters on the ship coming towards me.
This is now a moment of life and death. And for George and other sailors trying to get off the ship, it's extremely difficult and dangerous. The oil that was seeping out from the ships caught fire, and the prevailing trade winds blow it right down the line of ships. So you have fires that are right beside the ship.
Dad is trapped, and he couldn't literally go anywhere. So he said, help, somebody help. Miraculously, a rope appeared down the side of the USS Tennessee. And here he is on the West Virginia, and the USS Tennessee was several feet away. The father said, I'm gonna make a leap of faith. He jumped.
By the time the fire was under me, and I was on the line, swinging. Finally, by the grace of God, I got up, all the way up to the deck of the Tennessee.
If my father stayed where he was on the USS West Virginia, he would have been dead.
You're fortunate to have survived it.
We come from a long line of ancestors that had no other choice but to look to the hills for their strength. Psalms 91 is a personalized prayer that my father used. I will be with George in trouble and rescue George and honor George and give George my salvation. To God be the glory, because
it happened.
It happened. God heard that.
Those who survive swim to Ford Island. That includes Doris Miller, one of the last men to escape the ship.
The attack had lasted only 2 hours. Pearl Harbor was now a smoldering wreck. 21 vessels were sunk or damaged during the attack. 2,390 were killed.
My dad was shell-shocked right from that point forward. The trauma played such a significant role all through life that he had dreams just saying, get me out of here, get me out of here. Like he's back at Pearl Harbor.
These pictures triggered PTSD for Dad in ways that were unimaginable. And he would stare at them, and then he would make a comment, and then you might see him kind of break.
Just like most servicemen, they don't come back the same. I grew up with my dad. I've seen him go into a silent state, and I know inside, physically, mentally, there was a lot more that was going on. Knowing my dad the way I knew my dad, I knew something was wrong. I knew something was wrong.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
December 7th, 1941 really became a turning point in U.S. history. It was the event that eventually drew America into the war. All across the country, the cry was to remember Pearl Harbor.
But not everyone will be remembered, as the U.S. Navy begins to exclude black servicemen from the history books.
The U.S. Navy, as well as every newspaper in the United States, was covering the stories of heroes from Pearl Harbor. But they were all white.
The black press won't have it. They want black heroes recognized too. That's when the fight back really begins.
Of all the accounts submitted on that memorable day, the record shows a continual demonstration of courage, bravery, and fearlessness of which the American nation may well be proud.
There are rumors circulating that a black mess attendant has performed heroically, but the Navy is reluctant to identify who it was specifically.
After the attack, if you were white, your name was listed. Whatever you did that was so heroic was acknowledged openly. But when it came to my Uncle Doris, because he was a black man, he was just listed as a Negro mess man. They never said his name.
A number of important black newspapers, such as the Pittsburgh Courier, doesn't stand for that. They want to identify who it was specifically because they recognize this person should be regarded as a hero for what they did at Pearl Harbor. So the Pittsburgh Courier demands that military leaders release the name.
This is the newspaper article that went out 3 months after the raid at Pearl Harbor. The Pittsburgh Courier forced that name out of the Navy. And so this is the very first time that they actually name Uncle Doris.
At the same time, the Navy announces that 16 white sailors were involved at Pearl Harbor are being awarded a Medal of Honor. And the fundamental question in that moment for the African-American press is, why not Doris Miller? Was not his sacrifice, was not his courage in battle as great and as significant as those of his white compatriots?
The U.S. Navy can no longer suppress the news of Doris's heroism. So they change tack. Rather than erase Doris, they use him.
In 1942, the Navy finally acknowledges Doris Miller, but he doesn't receive the Medal of Honor. He receives the Navy Cross, the second highest award that the Navy could bestow.
As the first African-American recipient of the Naval Cross, Doris Miller is receiving recognition that the black community desperately wanted. At the same time, the Navy is seeking to exploit him.
At this point in the war, the fighting with the Japanese has ramped up considerably, and America need to fill their ranks. African Americans become a pool of soldiers and sailors that they can use to fill these vital roles.
The Navy sent Doris Miller on a tour of the United States, a war bond tour, to try to get more black men to join the Navy.
By the Navy giving him that cross, it was saying, we're not prejudiced at all. But it didn't show the true Navy that they were going to be joining, that there was still discrimination and hardship.
If there was ever an indication that somebody had the skill to be promoted into combat ranks, it's Doris Miller. And yet, he's still a messman. You'll see African Americans in large numbers enlisting, but the vast majority are still serving in the role of support services.
By now, war between the US and Japan is near its height, and our three heroes are dispersed across the Pacific.
After Pearl Harbor, my dad was reassigned to a task force to head out towards Australia.
I was still in shock. Most fellas were given hospital. I didn't have that privilege. So we took off. We were fighting every day. Every week there was some battle going on.
Clark Simmons is posted to a new ship and goes straight into battle.
It was not knowing what tomorrow is going to bring, and we were the front line.
Doris boards the USS Liscombe Bay and sails to a remote island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
My great-grandparents, they would listen to for what was going on.
Eastern Time and Columbia and its affiliated.
And then it came on the news. The Japanese planes bombed the USS Liscombe Bay.
Network beginning at 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
My great-grandparents, they knew that Doris was on that ship. And at that point, my great-grandmother knew her son would never return home.
Doris's body is never recovered. He is one of many African Americans who lose their lives in service to their country. Seeing your brothers in arms die in battle is traumatizing enough. But when black servicemen visit home during the war, they're in for a shock.
My father, he finally gets his first leave, and the reality of still being segregated kicked in big time. So he gets on the bus, and apparently he's not sitting in the back of the bus far enough. So the bus driver looks up and said, "Hey boy, will you get your blank to the rear of the bus?" There were 2 German prisoners of war getting on the bus. He said, "I'm here in a United States Navy uniform. You asking me to give up my seat for these 2 German prisoners of war?" The bus driver said, "Just get the H off the bus." The bus left him in the dust. And then he saw the German POWs kind of look, kind of smirked. And Dad, he said, "I don't even know why I'm fighting for this country. I don't understand why can I suffer out there in the Pacific, and then I get no respect."
One of the great ironies of World War II is that you had the world's greatest democracy in the United States fighting against the world's worst racist, Adolf Hitler. Yet we have the same version of white supremacy, the same kind of racial ideologies here in the United States.
It crystallizes the humiliation and anger that African Americans feel because we're being asked to sacrifice, but we'll gain nothing in the process for giving our lives.
My father, he often said this was the bedrock of the beginning of civil rights. And with his persistence, he said, I'm gonna show you I am one that's here to survive.
Most history books will tell you that the United States was fighting abroad during World War II, but that wasn't the case for Black veterans. For an old generation of Black veterans, they come home and they just keep fighting because they weren't willing to go back to the same America that treated them as second-class citizens. They wanted to fight for a new version of America, one in which Black Americans could have actual freedom and democracy. They say, if this is important for us to fight for internationally, we also need to fight for it here in the United States.
For George and Clark, it's a fight that continues throughout their lives.
Best you can from the best you get about them. One of these days it's gonna be all right. I won't be here to see it.
Life is very short, and there are more important things than just dollars and cents. And it's the respect that you get from your fellow man and dealing with your family and taking care of them.
In 2017, Doris's hometown of Waco erects a statue in his honor, so he will not be forgotten again. This is the first time Doris's family have been able to pay their respects together.
Oh, welcome, cousin. So.
I just remember growing up, hearing that crackle of great-grandma's voice and the tears that ran down her face, crying for her son that never ever came home.
Doris's memory is at last being restored, but the US Congress has still not awarded Doris the Medal of Honor.
The Medal of Honor, it's the highest honor that can be bestowed. One of the criteria for the medal to be given is to go above and beyond the call of duty. Many would argue, me included, he certainly did that.
To this day, not a single black sailor for their service in the Second World War has been awarded this highest honor.
My great-grandmother fought for many years to get the Congressional Medal of Honor for her son. It is something that he truly earned.
Thank you for his life, his legacy, for his heroics in Pearl Harbor. Amen.
Amen. And here we are. We're still fighting for that medal.
Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor to set free a suffering humanity.
There wasn't no turning back. I have to be brave.
You were taught not to be terrified. You did what you were supposed to do. As an American,
Those are the voices of men from the US Army's only black combat unit to land on the D-Day beaches. They're about to step into the largest invasion of World War II. Fail here, and the war is as good as over for the Allies. Victory in Europe depends on their acts of heroism.
Lead us to the saving of our country and a peace that will let all men live in freedom.
More than 8 million people of color served with the Allies during the Second World War.
Troops from India, African Americans, Asians.
My grandfather was one of these men, a soldier of color whose role in the war has never been honored.
These soldiers have really genuinely been hidden from history.
Now, by tracking down their descendants and unearthing forgotten archive, we're going to restore these unsung heroes to their rightful place.
They weren't supposed to write things that were going down when they were in the service, but he did it anyway. He brought us proof of what actually happened.
This series reevaluates 4 of the greatest battles of World War II and asks, who were these men?
These were guys that went above and beyond the call of duty.
What was their role in the most significant war of modern times?
Their stories deserve to be elevated and not erased.
And how do their experiences shape our modern world?
Everyone at the time understood that D-Day was going to be a turning point in the war.
This is the largest amphibious invasion ever planned in a military conflict. You have over 6,000 ships, 11,000 planes, 18,000 British and American paratroopers, and 160,000 troops.
Along with some of these troops on their landing craft are these things. An amazing piece of tech called a barrage balloon. This is footage of them from training exercises earlier in the war. And now, they'll be the Allies' secret weapon and a crucial line of defense.
The balloons were raised from the ground on a winch, and they were hiding, ideally in the clouds. They had small bombs that were tucked right up under them. A plane that struck the cable would release the bomb. The bomb would descend on a parachute, and it could explode the wing, it could explode the gas tank, and that's how the balloons could take out a plane. They were seen as highly successful. And so the Americans opened up a training camp called Camp Tyson in Northwest Tennessee, where they were teaching men to fly these balloons. There were 30 barrage balloon battalions, 4 of which were all black, and only the 320th would see service.
We've all seen the images of D-Day and watched the films, but what we haven't been shown are black soldiers in this battle.
The conventional wisdom was that there were no African Americans at D-Day.
But it's not true, because in landing craft, heading to France with their barrage balloons are the 621 black soldiers of the 320th, a combat unit with the mission to protect the invading infantry. They'll be some of the very first to touch down on the D-Day beaches.
You need to protect those troops as best you can, and the balloons were deemed one of the best ways to keep those beaches safe.
White soldiers landing at Omaha Beach were extensively filmed. but the 320th was not. So their heroic actions barely get a footnote in the historical record. But we've unearthed the stories of 3 men of the 320th taking up their positions in separate landing crafts. This is Henry Parham. He signed up for the draft at 19. Waverly Woodson is a trained medic attached to the 320th. And finally, we've got William Dabney, in charge of getting himself, 3 other men, and his balloon to shore. Each of these highly trained men will go on to play a vital role in the Allied mission to liberate France from Nazi occupation.
William G. Dabney is my father. I'm his oldest son. He was, on the surface, a quiet guy who seemed to be reserved until you got to know him. He loved wearing suits. He loved to dress sharp. Mom, how old was Dad in that picture?
At 27.
About 27 years old, right there. Top left is my mom.
Yes.
Mom, how old were you in that picture?
17.
Okay. Wow. Oh, you were quite a fox there, weren't you?
What can I say?
He was 17 and a half when he wanted to join the Army.
A lot of his buddies had joined. And at that time, a lot of people questioned the young people who were of the age to go into service, who weren't in service. They thought something was wrong with you.
There is a real rush from the American public to enlist and volunteer in the war effort. We also know that African Americans weren't exempt from that. They had a deep-held sense of patriotism.
At that time, for a black man or a black woman to serve in the military, it was a sign that they were American and that they had something to offer and that they were loyal and they would fight for their country. And many of them thought that by serving, they could help change things.
The trouble is, the US military reflected the same prejudice held by much of American society.
The American Army was segregated at this time, so all black units meant that the servicemen were men of color, but the leaders, the top commanders, were always white. And that was very deliberate by the Army, that tried to dehumanize the black soldier and made it so that they could not have positions of authority.
My dad was just turning 18 when he went to Camp Tyson. The way he said that they portrayed the 320th and the battalion he was going to be a part of, it was kind of, they were going to do like a secret mission.
William Dabney's performed so well in training that he's been promoted to crew chief. He bears the ultimate responsibility for raising his crew's balloon.
You was nervous, I guess, in a way, but you were scared, but also you were brave. You gonna make it or you're not gonna make it.
My dad said a lot of these guys were getting sick on the boat. Part, fear, anxiety, trepidation about what they were getting ready to face.
Somebody in charge told them that some of them would not return, meaning that it would be a lot of carnage and death. And be prepared.
The Allied invasion plans are top secret, so each of the 5 key landing beaches are given code names.
The Americans landed at Omaha in Utah to the west. The British and the Canadians landed at Sword, Gold, and Juneau.
All 3 of our men have been assigned Omaha Beach as their landing zone. Medic Waverly Woodson up front, with Crew Chief William Dabney close behind, And positioned right at the back is youngster Henry Parham. They know they are mission critical. They must get onto the beach at speed to raise their protected balloons, because the German Luftwaffe is fast approaching. As a medic, Waverly Woodson's going to be the first of our group to land. His mission will be to set up a treatment station. They anticipate thousands of casualties.
My name is Steve Woodson. I'm the proud son of Waverly B. Woodson Jr., combat medic for the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. Oh, his dog tags. We found these after he passed, and I've had them ever since. They'll be with me forever. My father was very recluse when he came to his actions in World War II, and in particular in D-Day. It's kind of typical with most veterans from that era.
I am the wife of Waverly Bernard Woodson, Jr. We really didn't get to hear really the full story and just how bad it was. He said it was very, very early in the morning. They left England, it was dark. They were all just stuffed in there.
It would take Waverly Woodson decades to fully open up about what he went through on Omaha Beach.
Before I got off the boat, maybe 2 or 3 miles offshore, the Germans sent an 88. Rather, 2 or 3 88s straight through the ship. Most deadly. They strafed the boat with 50 caliber machine gun. Then they landed the mortar shells. I was bending down, but I didn't quite get down fast enough. That thing hit that steel deck. That's when the mortar caught me. Just split the whole back of my backside out. I didn't feel too well.
I remember him telling me that. It was just carnage. Carnage beyond belief.
You can imagine that many of these men who were landing in the very first waves on Omaha Beach thought that they were landing in a suicide mission.
Everything that could possibly go wrong probably went wrong. Nothing went to plan.
Whilst Waverly Woodson makes his way onto the beach, approaching fast is William Dabney. He's focused on the inflated balloon tied to his waist, which he'll need to deploy when he lands.
My dad watched as guys were getting shot around him, trying to get off the boat. As the soldiers started to realize what was happening, they started to jump off the sides of the boat into the water. But as he was doing that, his balloon got shot off.
Before he even made it to the beach, William Dabney's mission is in shreds.
It was pretty devastating. Landing up to your neck under fire, toting 100 pounds of weight on your back.
A lot of people were killed and they never even got to the beach because either the water was so deep they couldn't move in it. The soldiers drowned. Others dropped so far they lost their gear. This is all happening while the Germans are shooting at them.
The German planes were scraping the beaches. There was a lot of fire going up, a lot of shooting going on. There's quite a lot of debris, including bodies and body parts. I saw someone get blew up by mines. The first thing we did was dig in the sand to get in so we would be protected from the scraping.
The men landed with shovels to dig trenches, but many of them took their helmets off and used their helmets to clear sand. These men not only were being tested for the first time in combat, but they entered what was a sheer bloodbath.
It may be hours before William Dabney can get a backup balloon supplied. All he can do now is hold his nerve and simply survive. What could be worse than digging in on Omaha Beach under fire? Well, perhaps it's this. Witnessing the explosions, know that it means carnage, yet being stuck out at sea. That's Henry Parham's reality. He may have even felt a little relief when he got the order to proceed. Henry's family was unable to give us an interview, but Linda Herview got to know Henry and his relatives while spending years researching her book about the 320th.
The majority of men in the 320th were drafted. They received a draft letter. Henry Parham got his and said, they got me. It's right after he turned 19.
We're about to hear from the man himself in a precious recording made more than half a century after the end of the war.
I was drafted. I would never volunteer.
We had no other alternative to do that or go to jail. We had no real choice.
Henry remembers 8 nauseating hours bobbing in the sea before they approached the beach.
Every step of that journey was about surviving, but getting them on the beach turned out to be just a rain of fire, a rain of death.
Just before 2 p.m., Henry's landing craft surges forward, about to enter the kill zone. While on the beach, William Dabney is safely dug into the sand. And further along, Waverly Woodson is about to put his medical training to the ultimate test, while still injured.
Most of us would say it was bedlam, confusion. There was mass confusion on that beach until 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Nobody knew what they were doing. Only thing they were trying to do is just to make sure that they didn't become a casualty.
I'm about to read my father, Waverly Woodson's Witness to D-Day, dated June 6, 1944. D-Day was the most emotional and dangerous day in my life. Many of the wounded didn't need dressing. They were already dead. All of this noise was deafening and spectacular, adding to the confusion of surviving soldiers. All day, medics continued to dress many, many wounds and consoled the frightened.
There's no such thing as a color barrier. In action, you don't have that. Whether you're white, blue, yellow, green, or purple, all of you are the same. A bullet will kill you.
With all this going on, I didn't have time to see how bad I was wounded. I know it was, but I only wanted to help the survivors. I gotta stop a minute. Gives me chills. I never sat down and read this and got the gravity out of it that I've gotten right now. It's amazing.
There's no surviving film footage of black medics in action on D-Day that we've been able to find. The US military record this: white medics treating white soldiers. So it's these images which endure. And the role of black medics like Waverly Woodson is largely forgotten. Yet Woodson served and saved despite the prejudice he and all African Americans endured in the military.
There is a controversy about serving in the war for black Americans. Even though more than 1 million black Americans served, there's still a clear sense of hypocrisy. They recognize that hypocrisy, they recognize that irony at the time, yet they're still, by and large, willing to fight.
Our guys from the 320th had dealt with the injustice of discrimination in some way throughout their lives. But they lived a more enlightened experience during the last phase of their training in the UK.
The men of the 320th landed in Scotland in 1943. There would be more than 1 million Americans passing through Britain. It was like Hollywood came to town one day.
Britain was no Shangri-La, but the racism that black people experienced there was nothing compared to what they experienced in the United States. Black Americans were received well in Europe.
Waverly mainly talked about how they were treated by the English people versus the people from his own country. When they would go out on their off-duty, and they would go to the pubs and theaters and whatnot, they mainly said the ladies treated them better.
That was the first time my dad had left the country, and it was quite an experience for him.
The white people in England were very accepting of the black soldiers. And the white soldiers from the United States hated it. They hated it. They told tales like black folks have tails, like an animal. And Bill said, one man said, "Oh, I'm an animal, huh?" Pulled out his pants and said, "Now where's my tail?" They were treating blacks so badly, and to think that these white people are so accepting. They just couldn't stand it.
The kind of reception that they got in Great Britain really filled their souls, made them feel appreciated, empowered them, made them feel beautiful and strong.
We're about to see footage captured by a British film crew showing African-American troops on parade in the English town of Kettering. It's a rich moment, one that displays the dazzle and hope hundreds of African-American soldiers bring to this small town.
It's not like what you would see if those same soldiers were marching in the South.
African Americans experience a kind of freedom in the UK that's just not possible within the United States, or didn't feel possible. They've experienced all kinds of new things that have fundamentally changed who they are.
I can imagine this parade is a highlight for these soldiers. A far cry from their reality on the beaches of Normandy and the throes of one of the most audacious battles in World War II. Back on the first day of the Allies' invasion, and our heroes are now experiencing the full force of the German defense. It's almost 8 hours into the bloody battle.
The plan was to get all members of the 320th on the beach that day. In each push, there was a wave of men behind.
To help his team raise their balloon, Henry Parham must first survive the enemy onslaught. But the tide has risen, making landing even more challenging.
Henry couldn't believe how much water there was all around, just deep water that they had to wade through.
They dumped us off the water up to our neck. While we were walking from the ship to the beach, bullets were falling all around. I was fortunate not to be hit by one.
Henry Parham approached his job with the ultimate professionalism, and he was as proud as could be that he knew everything about those balloons and how to get them in the air.
The first thing we did was to dig ourselves a trench, a hole. And that was the first time I ever been around a big body of water. I didn't really understand about the tide coming in and coming out. So I got to the point where I didn't know whether I should stand up or lay there and get drowned.
The job of Henry Parham and the others were to stay on the beach and to make sure that as long as ships could come into the Normandy beaches with supplies, that they would be safe from German strafing.
When the supplies finally start to arrive, William Dabney can receive his replacement balloon.
We soon got some more equipment in to raise the balloon.
He had a crew of 3 men. You needed the weight of at least 2 guys to hold it down.
The 320s had them flying from the ships and all around on different sites where the guns were located.
So we finally had a balloon at 11:15 p.m. on June 6th. The balloons that were on the Normandy beaches went up at night when there was more of a risk of German planes coming in to strafe the beaches. The next day, we had 20 on the beaches of Normandy.
Battalion records show that once the balloons are flying at full strength, only one enemy plane ever manages to get below the barrage line.
There was nothing scrapped on Normandy Beach because of the 320.
For the 320th on Omaha, it's a job well done, but only part of the job. Men like Parham now take on hidden enemy soldiers. Under the cover of the balloons, thousands of troops are able to land more safely, filmed extensively by the US Army. But we haven't discovered any footage of the 320th. All the while, Waverly Woodson has been treating the severely wounded for over 30 hours. He still hasn't had his own shrapnel wound treated, the one he got on the landing craft.
There is no hero. It's just that you're there and you do what you can. I don't remember how many personnel I bandaged up or helped treated or what have you.
I remember him telling me that there were a number of soldiers that he was holding their hand. Yeah, holding her hand and saying, you know, let my mom know I love her. He actually wanted to stay there and continue to help until he collapsed. And then that was approximately 30 to 36 hours from the time they landed on the beach. And they had to restrain him after his wounds were dressed to keep him from going back.
He wanted to save lives. He cared about those men. He wanted them to have a future.
We don't know how many lives Waverly Woodson saved, but we do know his path to recognition gets an immediate setback.
We know that Waverly Woodson was nominated for the Medal of Honor because there was a handwritten note from an aide in the War Department to an aide to the president. He would not get it. The black press began calling on the White House to award the Medal of Honor. No black soldiers in World War II received the Medal of Honor.
For too long, America's had amnesia about the contributions of black Americans to World War II. It's too easy to tell the history of the war without paying any attention to the more than 1 million black men and women who served in the war.
D-Day is a huge military success, but that success comes at a cost.
3 men from the 320th died during the D-Day battle and are buried with white soldiers in Normandy.
This is remarkable footage, seemingly a joint memorial for both black and white soldiers. A moment in military history without segregation or prejudice.
This image symbolizes the fact that black people were there, that black people fought and died right next to their white counterparts in these horrendous battles. It's like the great equalizer is a war.
By the end of June, 850,000 Allied troops had landed on the beaches of Normandy. The D-Day invasion was the beginning of the end for the Germans. In the months following D-Day, the war shifts in different ways, and really it becomes a new type of war.
The 320th can consider this mission accomplished. Now it's time for the United States Third Army, a massive mechanized force. And here's William Dabney recalling the tanks rolling in as he's preparing to roll out.
General Patton broke the war in Italy, and he came up with the tank division. I remember me crews on the beach when he came in, and we were so glad to see the tank division with all that heavy equipment and whatnot.
William Dabney witnessed another first, an elite African-American tank division called the Black Panthers. Their incredible story, another example of heroism and its erasure, is also shared in this series. They'll be pivotal in pushing the enemy all the way back to Berlin in the bloodiest American campaign of World War II. After 140 days in France, the 320th prepare to ship out. Henry Parham prepares for his return to civilian life.
You did what you were supposed to do. I was never wounded, so I made it pretty good. We was back home for Christmas.
An aide to Eisenhower wrote about how the Black Balloon troops were distinguishing themselves and how they impressed everyone with their performance and with their professionalism. Articles were written about them back home.
But the recognition that was promised never comes to fruition. The more than 1 million black soldiers returning home discover much of white America isn't ready to move beyond segregation. Soon, black vets' war achievements are suppressed in the mainstream media. In other words, erased.
Throughout my research, I would hear this. There were no black soldiers at D-Day. Even archivists in places that should know this did not know that there were black troops. You have to ask yourself, who are our historians? Who is protecting our record?
My dad was a little frustrated and disgusted. He noticed that coming back to the States, coming home, black soldiers still had to ride on the back of the train. Blacks could not go in the store. And if they wanted to be fed, they had to go around to the back to get their food. And he said to come back home to the same old racism that he had left was disappointing. It was kind of like all the things he had done during the war didn't count for anything. We don't have pictures of him in uniform. He did not want to have anything to do with it after the war.
One of the great ironies of the American involvement in World War II is that as they were fighting to free all of these people, right, the Americans, the great liberators of Europe, they are perpetuating some of the same atrocities at home.
I didn't understand why any black man would want to serve this country, especially during that time. The soundtrack of America was lynching, Jim Crow, racism, discrimination. It was really, really tough.
Discrimination has taken many forms, and the injustices would affect generations to come.
This mom and dad, I don't know how old they are, but that's my dad and my mom, kind of young.
We first got married. I went to the bank, so sure that we could borrow money. They wanted to know right off, what kind of collateral do you have? Uh-oh, here's a word I'm not familiar with. What is collateral? Well, we ended up getting a loan through a black-owned insurance company because the bank was giving us a runaround. You know, they weren't saying no, but they were putting blocks in the way.
Waverly got brushed aside when he came back and he wanted to go on through medical school so he could help people.
I feel that how my father was treated post-World War II was disgraceful, as well as many other African-American soldiers. And these were guys that went above and beyond the call of duty on many occasions, not to prove themselves as equals, but to do their duty.
There were hundreds of black veterans who served in World War II who went on to become civil rights leaders in the 1950s and 60s.
The start of the civil rights movement that we know came from that generation. It came from men who served, who sacrificed their life. Martin Luther King's generation is the World War II generation, and many of the men who stood and marched with him are of that era. And they created magic and changed the lives of all black people in this country.
But while political improvements are moving at pace, public recognition for the contributions of vets like the men of the 320th is frustratingly slow.
Do you have that folder you found last night with the pictures from France? Okay.
It's a very emotional history to work on, because when you look into the sources, it makes you angry, because you see what they were trying to give to the country, but you see how much the country refused to acknowledge that service, acknowledge that patriotism.
When any recognition does come, for many, it doesn't even come from their home country.
This is Legion d'Honneur Medal, and that is the highest honor that France awards for military, politics, anything. It's like our Medal of Honor in the States. This is the actual certificate that he got along with the medal, and it says Order of the National Legion d'Honneur by the President of the Republic of France, and then it says that he is a Chevalier de la Légion d'Honneur. So he's a knight of the French Republic. I think that's way cool. I said, Dad, you're a knight. He couldn't believe it. I think the difference was France was invaded and occupied. So they got a real appreciation for the people who liberated them. And for every one of them who survived, that was their way of saying thank you. The United States, on the other hand, they don't have the same sense of gratitude or appreciation. To them, the soldiers were just doing their duty.
Waverly Woodson's son, Steve, makes a life-changing journey to honor his father's sacrifices and the experiences he went through on D-Day.
This is my first time in Normandy. It won't be my last. Flushed with emotion, but the gravity of it when you get here is truly, truly heart-wrenching. He always spoke of how horrible war was, and he hoped that he would never see it again, and he hoped that no one else got to see it again. But they survived. A lot didn't. I'm just very appreciative of everybody that sacrificed for freedom.
Henry Parham was the last member of this battalion to leave us. He died on July 4th, Independence Day 2021, 4 months shy of his 100th birthday. When Ethel, his wife, called me and said, "We lost Henry, but on Independence Day," through tears, we laughed that Henry chose Independence Day to leave us because it was very fitting of Henry. Henry, who was overlooked in his life, that's when he chose to make his departure.
I keep this picture on my counter in my kitchen. I can say goodnight to him every night, and I can say good morning to him every morning because he's always in my presence.
Today's special ceremony is a very important step on the path towards securing justice for Corporal Woodson.
On October 11th, 2023, Waverly Woodson is awarded the Combat Medical Badge years after he died and decades after his heroic D-Day actions.
I think that the badge that my father was recently awarded would have been huge for him. I do wish that the Army had recognized him before he passed.
Please join me in placing a wreath in memory of Staff Sergeant Waverly Woodson.
16 D-Day veterans have been presented with the Medal of Honor, and Waverly Woodson's family are still fighting for him to receive this accolade too. You've got to hope they'll be granted the award within his wife Joanne's lifetime.
Dunkirk was now in ruins. There was no preparation. The French should have planned better. The British should have planned better.
In amongst all this is a group of men you've likely never heard of. An Indian unit of the British Army called Force K6. Their selfless actions on this Dunkirk beach will help save the Allies from a crushing defeat.
I refuse to be guided by fears. And I believed in the struggle for freedom, cost what it may.
More than 8 million people of color served with the Allies during the Second World War.
Troops from India, African Americans, Asians.
My grandfather was one of these men. a soldier of color whose role in the war has never been honored.
These soldiers have really genuinely been hidden from history.
Now, by tracking down their descendants and unearthing forgotten archive, we're going to restore these unsung heroes to their rightful place.
They weren't supposed to write things that were going down when they were in the service, but he did it anyway. He brought us proof of what actually happened.
This series re-evaluates 4 of the greatest battles of World War II and asks, who were these men?
These were guys that went above and beyond the call of duty.
What was their role in the most significant war of modern times?
Their stories deserve to be elevated and not erased.
And how do their experiences shape our modern world? Emerging from this ship is a special cargo, equipment that will supply frontline troops in the difficult conditions of the French winter. The men looking after this equipment are these guys, Force K6 of the British Royal Indian Army. They're volunteers from the Punjab region of modern-day Pakistan. And they'll be on the front line fighting with the British Expeditionary Force against Nazi Germany. This cargo, war mules.
My great-grandfather told me a mule is not like a dog, very much its own mind. Very precious animals because they've come such a long way. It's not like they're easily replaceable. Mules are very hardy, and the British Indian Army had vast knowledge of supplying inaccessible areas using mules.
When you are trying to move supplies, it's dangerous. They're in the middle of war zones. They were so important to just keeping things going. They kept men alive.
Despite the crucial role they play, Force K6 isn't represented in the popular telling of Dunkirk's history. But from war records and personal diaries, we've pieced together the stories of 4 men. Their documents have been passed from generation to generation, and you'll hear their words voiced by actors. Here's Captain Anis Khan, an English-speaking officer and aristocrat. This man here is Siddiq Ahmed, an assistant surgeon in a hospital back in India. And this is Chowdhury Wali Muhammad, just 22 years old when he lands in France. And finally, we've got Major Akbar Khan, a veteran of World War I and the only man in the group who's seen active service.
My name is Syed Hashmi. I am Major General Muhammad Akbar Khan's eldest great-grandchild. This is a picture of my great-grandfather with the men of his unit. You know, this is how I think of him, as being surrounded by the people that he cares about, the men of his unit, and the pride and their professionalism. It just comes through in this photo so clearly. I remember him being the most regal person that I have ever met. He was also the tallest man in any room, and he was a giant. I mean, literally a giant to us. Interesting thing about my great-grandfather is that he rose from the ranks. He was somebody that started as a recruit, as the lowest of the low, and then became an officer. And he was called to go to France.
The Indian K6 unit was the first reinforcement to proceed from India to France. And it was a new and unique formation. It did not exist in peacetime.
Over the next 6 months, the experiences of these men in the cauldron of battle would affect not just the trajectory of this war, but the fate of an empire.
There's a common myth that Britain stood alone in this war, but actually it was the British Empire who fought this war. By the time the Second World War breaks out, India has experienced nearly 200 years of colonial rule. But in reality, India as a colony was poor, and men were signing up because they had access to better medicine, better health, better food, and more job opportunities. There was money to send back home. There were 2.5 million men from India who signed up, widely considered to be the largest volunteer army in the world.
So what do these guys face when they get to Europe? Germany has already advanced east, and now they turn their attention to France. So the British gather an expeditionary force to fight the Germans. In terms of Force K6, Akbar and Chowdhury Wali's units get sent from Marseille to the outskirts of Lille. And Captain Anis and Medic Siddiq receive orders to head straight towards the enemy, near Allied fortifications called the Maginot Line. Their job is crucial and dangerous.
The tanks, the artillery, the infantry, they needed supplies, ammunition, food, all kinds of stuff. So Force K6, the men, the mules, they're part of that enormous logistical exercise of getting the stuff to the front line.
But on the ground, experienced men like Major Akbar begin to have doubts about the Allied defenses. He understands how exposed to danger his men really are.
If you read his writing, my great-grandfather thinks that the French are complacent. He has a sense of what is coming, and he's not sure whether they're ready.
Tenth of May, 1940, the Blitzkrieg started. The Germans attacked the Netherlands, Belgium, France, all at the same time. They didn't confront the Maginot Line head-on. They went round it. The tanks were driving through at high speed, heading for the Channel. There was major panic.
The British were supposed to fight as a unit with the French. The British in the north, the French in the south. Well, what the Germans did was they cut in between both militaries and divided them.
Really happened incredibly quickly. Within days, the French army had been completely cut up. And so the decision was made to withdraw the majority of the British army across the Channel back to England.
It's said wars are not won by evacuations. But this one would go on to become one of the most crucial operations of the entire war. The evacuation of Dunkirk.
Major Akbar received an order to leave where they were and to march for the coast, to march towards Dunkirk. Whilst being very much aware that there are the Luftwaffe overhead, that there are also German tanks nearby.
From his camp in northern France, the question for Akbar is how he navigates his way through the British Army's hierarchy to lead his men out of this hell.
The Indian Army under the British was a fundamentally racist structure. The army starts off with there being no Indian officers at all. All officers are British and they're white. So immediately you see that there is a very asymmetrical power dynamic on which the army is built. From the 20s and 30s, there's really a push towards Indianization, as it's known. So that's educated middle-class Indian men saying, we deserve a place in the officer class as well.
Major Akbar's rise through the ranks can be pieced together because of the stories he told many of his descendants.
My name is Shahid Hassan Khan, and I'm the grandson of Major General Muhammad Akbar Khan. What you can see over here is that he would be very much getting fully involved with the men who was working with him. He would dine with them. Unlike, you see, the British officers in those days were very aloof. But Akbar Khan considered each one of the soldiers as his own family, and that is, I think, one of his key characteristics of being a successful leader. He is the only non-white officer. Very few people were able to make it to the ranks of being acknowledged as somebody important. My grandfather wrote, he is the person who is in charge of the safety of the 300 men. This was the most unnerving kind of experience he had ever felt. He had participated firsthand as a fighting soldier in the First World War. He had seen the ravages of war, he had seen blood everywhere. So he knew what it takes. It was a very challenging task. And yet he was determined not to leave his men behind and take them all out to safety if possible.
When the Germans invaded France, if you read my great-grandfather's memoirs, he says, they told me at about 1600 hours that I could tell my men to throw away my arms, so they should try to reach the beaches of Dunkirk immediately. Basically, run for their lives.
I could not believe what I had heard. How could one throw away arms and surrender to the enemy, and yet escape punishment prescribed for a deserter or one who showed cowardice? As a Muslim, I refused to be guided by fears. And I believed in the struggle for freedom, cost what it may.
So he holds a conference with his men and says, hey, we're in this together. We're going to get through this together. There is almost no engagement by the people that he's reporting to. So in a real sense, he's on his own in a foreign country with mules. You know, there's an expression on the streets, you bring a knife to a gunfight. He has mules when they're tanks that are breathing down his neck.
Instead of disbanding, Akbar and his men begin an orderly retreat to the port of Dunkirk, around 50 miles away, for evacuation. But our other company of Force K6 is around 250 miles away. Medic Sadiq Ahmed and Captain Anis Khan are in the thick of it. Anis proposes a plan to evade the Germans. It brings him into conflict with his commanding officer, so they're staying put despite the risk of capture or worse. A man like Anis is rare. One of a handful of Indian men trained at the renowned British Officer Academy at Sandhurst in England. A tough place for an Indian, among so many who would have looked down on him. But somehow, he wasn't worn down by it.
The gravity of the situation was now beginning to be realized by all, but there was not the slightest change in the demeanor of the men.
I'm Zeenat Ziad. I'm the youngest child of Major General Sahibzada Anis Ahmed Khan. My father could be defined by two words: integrity and decency. He had a very strong sense of justice. And the stoicism, he never complained. This is the classic photograph, and I think you can see him as a very happily married man with a lovely brood of children. Within a week of this photograph, he was called away. His life changed forever.
I'm imagining Major Anis's situation. A trained officer, having to follow orders even when he believes those orders put the lives of his men at risk. As supplies dwindle, their options are running out.
I think for Anis and the men of that company, there was increasingly a sense that they were cut off. And the time of great uncertainty, I think this would have increased the uncertainty. How can we get out of this awful mess?
In June 1940, Hitler smashed through the Western defenses and overran France.
So France, by this point, has capitulated to Germany. It's undergoing peace negotiations with Germany, and German forces have really taken over.
France was defeated within a matter of weeks. Nobody knew that was going to happen.
The order to evacuate Sadiq Ahmed and Captain Anis Khan's unit eventually comes. But it's too late to make it to Dunkirk, so they have to head for neutral Switzerland. But that's a 100-mile trek through enemy-occupied land. Many other Allied units escaping to Switzerland also didn't make it.
Thousands of British troops, fortunately, were taken prisoners. The prisoners of war were held in prison camps that stretched from Poland all the way to Italy.
They really had no idea what the Germans are going to do to their prisoners of war. They had massacred people that they had captured. This is addressed to my mother. Dear Madam, the following cabled message has been received by this office from the International Red Cross, Geneva. I regret to inform you, Captain Anis has been taken prisoner.
You know, Anis and Sadiq almost made it, captured just a few days from the Swiss border. We'll pick up their story later. Akbar and Chowdhury Wali are only 20 miles from evacuation on the beaches of Dunkirk. But the dangers they face from the approaching enemy are increasing by the hour.
One of the things that comes out from my great-grandfather's memoirs is that it is a harrowing journey. At one point, his men marched almost continuously for 36 hours. There's bombardment by the Luftwaffe. As the journey goes on, the supplies keep dwindling. There's no one else to protect him or his men. They're on their own.
It must have been hard on a guy like Chowdhury Wali, being so young. We know the details of that journey because of what he's told his family.
My father was Chowdhury Wali Muhammad. He joined the army when he was very young. He was only 17. He was from a small village. Doubt if they knew much about Europe, what it would be like here. He used to tell us a lot of stories when I was a young boy. Like, there was a lot of bombing from the Germans, and at night time, that was causing a lot of fires. There were so many fires, it was like a daylight. The whole place was on fire. Must have been very frightening, being so far away from your country and your family in an unknown land.
They reached the town of Kassel, which is a medium-sized town on the way. Clearly not prepared for what was going to happen. There are dead people and dead animals alongside the road. They're on the front line now. It's like they're actually being attacked by the Germans themselves.
My great-grandfather, he has to make a difficult decision. He's got a long train of men and mules, and they make an easy target for the enemy. Mules make his men more visible and make him more vulnerable, so he has to let them go. But he chooses to do that to protect his men.
And it must have been really heartbreaking for Akbar and his men, because they were in love with those animals. For many, many years, they have worked with them, trained with them, so they were so much attached to those mules.
There was little time for sentiment. They've just 18 miles to go, but it will take extraordinary courage to face day after day of enemy fire. Akbar and Chaudhry Wali must have questioned if they'd make it out alive. For every 5 soldiers who would evacuate from Dunkirk, 1 was captured and imprisoned.
Nazi Germany operated over 1,000 prison camps. Life in these prison camps were very, very difficult.
Anis spent all of the war in prisoner of war camps. He was in a number of different POW camps for nearly 5 years. Really not a very happy way to spend the war.
You know, many people died of TB in the camps. My father lost most of his teeth. His eyesight became weak. With starvation, with the cold, with the lack of medical facilities, it must have been pretty bad.
At that time, Anis is one of the few Indian officers in German captivity.
I think men like Anis would have 100% witnessed continual daily prejudice. I can think back to another Indian officer's record in Europe, and he said the most opposition he faced there was not so much from his German guards, but from the white British officers who resented having him there and saw him as an imposter.
Prisoners of the same nationality were usually confined together. But Sadiq's skills mean the enemy transport him from camp to camp.
So Sadiq was a medic, he was a doctor. They were treated slightly differently. They were required to work as medics and would definitely have been moving around in a variety of different prisoner of war camps.
Now, Sadiq is biding his time. Like all good heroes, he's got a plan.
Sadiq, with 2 other officers, are in the south of France, tantalizingly close to the border with Spain, the Pyrenees. Spain was a neutral country in the Second World War. They know that if they can get across those mountains, that they'll be free.
I was ordered to leave by rail for Stalag 232 in the Bayonne area. Before this, I had made plans to escape when the opportunity arose. I had 500 francs of my own, which I stitched inside the seam of my boots. At 4 a.m., our prisoner of war train stopped at a small station called Sainte-Marie. At the time, the guards were asleep. As the train pulled out of the station, we managed to jump off and run away unseen.
Escaping in France in 1943 for an Indian soldier was difficult. Apart from anything else, they don't really blend into the background. They've got nothing to eat. The Germans are looking for them, and they don't know where they're going. It's a big gamble.
The weather was extremely cold, and we found it difficult to obtain food, living for 3 days on only 2 potatoes each. From there, we made our own way on foot. After a trek lasting some 10 days, we eventually reached Andorra, where the proprietress of the local hotel gave us food and accommodation. We had made it to freedom.
What little we know of Sadiq's remarkable escape comes from new detective work.
He was from a village just outside Delhi, and I've never managed to trace any of his relatives who are still living now. Why is it such a hidden story? Why has this not been publicized or written up? They're there in the archives. You can find them in the archives. You can find the documents, but they're not known about in the public discourse, in the collective memory in this country.
After this adventure, there is little in any records about Sadiq. There's mention that he boarded a boat to India via Cairo. I hope he saw his family again, and I hope he had a good life. Back in France, and after 8 days on the road, Akbar's unit finally makes it to the coast of northern France. The town's under attack. Ahead of them, it's chaos. What's coming will be known as the Miracle of Dunkirk.
When my great-grandfather and his unit reached Dunkirk, there's madness. There's fear, despair. It's heartrending.
The Luftwaffe bombing the beach. The Germans are literally all around. There was a sense of this is the end.
Everything was on fire.
the whole of Dunkirk was alight. The ship we were supposed to board was sunk.
It's clear to Akbar there are not enough boats to evacuate the more than 300,000 men that will crowd the beach. The steel he now shows is extraordinary.
They've got no equipment, they're just down to their uniforms and maybe their water bottles. And they're marching along the beach, and they're marching properly. They're marching as one unit, as one group. I can imagine the British Tommies and the French watching this extraordinary display of resilience, strength, toughness in the face of this, appalling situation.
Of course, this act of exemplary leadership wasn't filmed, so Dunkirk's archives can't reflect the full picture. The enemy attacks continue in waves. Akbar waits day after day amongst thousands on the beach for the order to evacuate. Now, he and his men risk their lives for a greater goal, to help as many others to safety as possible.
After they've already been on that beach for 6 days, a place of hell, they don't take flight, they don't break ranks. They let others go ahead of them.
My men, about 300 strong, behaved most splendidly till the turn for their embarkation came. Orderly, hence quicker and easier. Our regiment proved themselves excellent ambassadors of India.
My great-grandfather helps with the embarkation of other troops and then finally his own. If that's not heroism, I'm not sure what is.
Dunkirk would end up being a symbol of hope. Saving those men bought time, and they were able to fight another day. That time was the difference between winning and losing the war.
British Prime Minister Winston Churchill is famously quoted as saying Dunkirk's evacuations are a miracle of deliverance. The actions of Force K6 are an unsung example of the heroism that took place on that beach. Akbar and Chowdhury Wali must have felt relief to finally reach the shores of England. Now, they'd experienced life in the British Empire's mother country.
It's very interesting to note what the men would have made of ordinary life lived in Britain at that time.
What they'd previously seen of Britain was the people that they'd met in India, so military, and then this kind of massive middle class. They're used to a situation where the white British guys are in charge and the Indians are subservient. And here they come to this situation where it's not like that.
They must have seen the UK life here, the way people lived, and must have been quite surprised to find there's people here no different than people back home.
Perceiving white people as your equals can really go quite far in telling you that you deserve equal rights.
At first, they enter the spotlight, their contributions acknowledged. We found this footage hidden in the archives. That's Akbar Khan proudly presenting his unit for inspection. But these images are more about manipulation than recognition.
The reason they were there was because they were seen as being ambassadors for the British Empire, ambassadors for India.
So Britain was recruiting from across the British Empire. And there was a real sense that these numbers of men needed to be higher if Britain was to make it through the war.
Over the course of the war, showcasing the accomplishments of units like Force K6 means millions of men across the empire join up.
In 1943, you start to see the first Allied victories in World War II. You have soldiers from all over the world that are a part of the Allied force, and they're serving in many capacities and performing extremely well.
And so, on the battlefields, the seeds of independence for many empire nations are sown. The fight against Nazi oppression blossoms into a fight against broader oppression. For India, this means directly confronting the ruling British colonists.
People had believed that negotiations were possible with the British, that political rights could be achieved and certain liberties would be given to them. But in reality, things turned more draconian.
India was different after the war, and so were its soldiers.
They certainly came back with an increased sense of what was owed to them, what their rights were, what their legitimate demands were.
Now, 2.5 million men had seen the world. And my great-grandfather writes about how his own men had been transformed by this war. They were fighting for rights that they did not have in their own country.
By 1946, it's a sentiment shared by many in a turbocharged Free India movement.
I had come through a war unscathed. A war fought to end Nazi domination. I began to ask myself questions. What right had the British to rule over our country?
For those former prisoners of war, what makes a man truly free becomes a burning question.
My father was the longest serving Indian officer prisoner of war in the whole World War II. And their presence back in India after the war was what speeded up independence. The British, I think, saw the writing on the wall.
So the Quit India movement really brings to a head anti-colonial protest at that time in India. Somewhere as vast as India is highly divided by class, by gender, by profession, by trade. And this affects how they think about things like political freedom.
Of course, each of India's main religious groups, Sikh, Hindu, Muslim, has a different idea of what independence looks like. When the British declared they'll split India broadly along religious lines, they trigger a catastrophic partition.
So partition was the partition of British-owned or occupied India into the nation-states of modern-day India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, which was then known as East Pakistan. And it led to horrific levels of communal violence.
The way it was handled, the abrupt nature of the British leaving, it's one of the great tragedies of history.
Communities that had lived together in relative harmony were forced to see each other as different. And often the line would go through a particular village. Millions displaced, losing their property, losing land, losing the place they called home. The exact number of people dead are not known, but it's between 1 and 2 million. We live with the legacy of what was done in those tumultuous days. It's a tragic way in which the hopes and dreams of ending 200 years of colonial rule really play out.
My great-grandfather wanted freedom for India, and he felt that, his struggles, his sacrifice was geared towards that end. All the hardships that he had endured were to build a better world. He's seeing the violence up close and personal, and I think somewhere in him there's a deep sense of loss that it has come to be so bloody, that, brother turned on brother, and I think that tragedy stays with him.
My father decided that he would stay on in India, but he was disillusioned. And as many Muslims did, he moved to Pakistan. The psychological and emotional damage, it had to have taken a toll on his heart. And he had a massive heart attack. And literally, he was in hospital for a day and he was gone. He was only 62.
Do you miss him?
I do. To this day. I was very fortunate to have a father like that. I don't think many people are.
My father fought 2 wars. Not only he liberated Europe, he liberated India as well. He was about 104 when he passed away. He had a good life, long life, very healthy, good innings.
I have a deeper appreciation of who he was and what he did. He had fought both in the First World War and in the Second World War, and he made all these sacrifices because he wanted to build a better world. And as the years have gone by, I increasingly recognize I stand on the shoulder of a giant.
After returning home, the stories of the Force K6 men at Dunkirk fall through the cracks. As the British Empire crumbles, their contributions fade.
I think it's important to bring these things out of the shadows and into the light, and let people know about them and let people hear about them and let people, feel proud about them.
To remember these men now is a tribute to all who have fought for freedom.
Enemy tank inbound!
These are the men of the 761st Tank Battalion. They call themselves the Black Panthers. And they're the first black armored unit fighting in a racially segregated US Army. In the bloodiest American battle of World War II, their actions will be pivotal to the liberation of Europe and victory over Nazi Germany.
Fire!
More than 8 million people of color served with the Allies during the Second World War.
Troops from India, African Americans, Asians.
My grandfather was one of these men, a soldier of color whose role in the war has never been honored.
These soldiers have really genuinely been hidden from history.
Now, by tracking down their descendants and unearthing forgotten archive, we're going to restore these unsung heroes to their rightful place.
They weren't supposed to write things that were going down when they were in the service, but he did it anyway. He brought us proof of what actually happened.
This series reevaluates 4 of the greatest battles of World War II and asks, who were these men?
These were guys that went above and beyond the call of duty.
What was their role in the most significant war of modern times?
Their stories deserve to be elevated and not erased.
And how do their experiences shape our modern world? The fall of 1944 sees thousands of American servicemen and women on the beaches of Normandy. Their mission is the liberation of France.
By October of 1944, the Allies believed that the Axis powers, and specifically Germany, is on its heel.
The Allies have started to get the upper hand in the war. They're pushing aggressively across France and forcing the Germans to take strategic retreating positions. So on the Eastern Front, the Soviet Union is pushing them from the opposite direction. Germany is trying to fight two fronts at the same time.
Leading the advance is three-star General George S. Patton, commander of the Third Army, a huge mechanized military force. He arrives with a phenomenal weapon.
Over the course of the war, tanks are going to be the decisive factor in battle after battle. This technology will help turn the tide in favor of the Allies.
When compared to German tanks, the Sherman tank was a versatile tank that had good mobility. A tank battalion offers protection to infantry. They were an effective fighting machine with high-velocity main guns designed for mowing down the enemy.
More than 40 tank units assemble at Normandy. Among them is the 1st Black Tank Battalion, the 761st, made up of over 50 tanks and around 700 men. Some of these men were captured in iconic photos like these, but you'll barely find any film of them in action because attention was focused elsewhere. Truth is, the real story of this battalion wasn't fully acknowledged for decades. But now, through war diaries and rare interviews, we can tell the stories of 3 members of the 761st. Their heroism plays a vital role in securing victory for the Allies. Here's Johnny Stevens, platoon sergeant. He's a rule-breaking adrenaline junkie from Georgia, a born leader who's in charge of his tank. And there's drafty Floyd Dade, something of a reluctant hero, but serious about his duty. As a loader, he's trained to keep his tank's guns supplied with ammunition. Finally, we've got the baby of the group, 16-year-old New Yorker E.G. McConnell. He's a gunner and an absolute crack shot. We'll hear E.G. himself recorded almost 50 years after the war. He recalls what drove him to enlist.
Man, I just wanted to volunteer for the tanks. I just felt it was a patriotic duty. That's why I wanted to go, and I wanted a piece of action.
My father was extremely proud to have served in the United States Army. Usually within 2 minutes of meeting him, he would mention the word, "I'm a veteran." He took some teasing from the guys because he was the youngest. They nicknamed him Youngblood. He was only 16 years old.
Making all the more necessary the intensive training of the day.
McConnell said before he enlisted, he would go to the movies with his friends. There would be tanks rampaging across the maneuver fields.
Rolling fortresses geared to demolish anything in their path.
When he and his friends saw that, they really liked the idea that this was going to be a war on wheels and tracks.
He was really pumped up and excited to get into action. He convinced his mother, please, 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 sign the papers. I want to go and fight for our country.
Being a black soldier during World War II was one of the worst things that could happen to you because you were going to wind up at a Southern training facility.
Like many black servicemen trained under segregation, the presence of the 761st wasn't widely welcomed.
They trained for 2 years, for a very long time, compared to white units. It was longer because the Army didn't seem to know what to do with this Black Tank Battalion. Some people thought the 761st Tank Battalion would be a demonstration battalion. In other words, they would never see combat.
The United States is reluctant to deploy black troops to the European theater. They didn't want to see black Americans have that same access to heroism as white soldiers, have that same access to the medals that could be earned in combat.
It must have taken a lot of mental strength for the 761st to cope with the prejudice they faced. But they turned it to their advantage.
They know these tanks intimately, every nook and cranny. They can break them down, and they're able to get them to run even in the darkest night.
By the time they were committed to combat, the tankers were razor sharp.
After landing in Normandy, our three heroes, E.G. McConnell, Johnny Stevens, and Floyd Dade, are in a column of over 50 tanks speeding through eastern France.
They have no time to rest. They have to sprint to catch up 400 miles to meet up with Patton and the Third Army. General Patton finds himself desperately in need of tankers in order to make this last push, this last offensive against the Nazis.
You have these small French towns where you have the Allies and the Germans who are fighting from town to town. It's a slow, very bloody, difficult fighting.
The 761st is going to have to deal with the massive fortifications and obstacles and obstructions that the enemy has put in place to maintain its position. And they'll find that this is going to be a very deadly and costly operation.
Platoon Sergeant Johnny Stevens is in one of the tanks, dashing to link up with Patton's Third Army.
The 761st is traveling both day and night, but it's here that that grueling training regimen that they had first at Camp Claiborne will kick in. They're ready for this, and they can meet the challenge.
Like every man in the 761st, this will be Johnny's first experience of war. But if he has any nerves, you wouldn't know it. Here's Johnny now, from a rare museum recording made almost 60 years after the war.
They called me a maverick. See, my job is chasing dramas.
My father wasn't scared of anything. He was a hero to me my whole entire life. I would wait for him every day to come home from work. He's a very strong man. I consider him like kind of like an oxymoron. You know, like a jumbo shrimp, how is that possible? A hard man, but a soft, good, kind man? I've never seen him be afraid. I've never seen him back down from anything or anybody.
Johnny Stevens was our Humphrey Bogart. Tough guy, ready to fight. If you ever seen the movie Sahara, where Humphrey Bogart plays a tank commander, well, Johnny Stevens was the real thing.
See, you had three ways of doing things. You had the right way, the Army way, and the Johnny Stevens way.
True to form, Johnny turns a blind eye to Army regulations and writes a personal diary. Now, Doreen keeps it under lock and key, and this is the first time its contents have been shared.
They weren't supposed to write things down, but he did it anyway. He brought us proof of what actually happened. And knowing I'm able to sit here and hold this diary, couldn't ask for more than that.
Official war records fail to capture the 761st personal battle experiences. Johnny Stevens' diary gives us a unique day-by-day account.
November 5th, 1944. We're on a hill outside of this village, but we're treated better here than back home.
The majority of those Black troops have never been abroad before. They've never left the country. When they end up in Europe, the experience that they have is both bewildering and illuminating.
In Europe, I didn't find any discrimination. You could go anywhere you wanted to, do anything you want to do.
They're welcomed into homes. They have the experience of being treated like human beings.
They described feeling like they could breathe for the first time. They were away from the virulent racism in the United States, that they didn't feel like they were being treated as second-class citizens.
The irony, though, is they're still serving in a segregated army. And they'll still be treated as second-class citizens by many of the men they've been sent to protect. "23 days after landing in Normandy, Johnny Stevens and the rest of the 761st reached the 3rd Army camps. Here, they're presented to none other than Allied Commander General George S. Patton.
Patton is flamboyant, colorful, over the top. Someone who looms large in the American imagination, not only for his military prowess, but because of his bombast and his ability to get the most out of his men.
Now, General Patton's a controversial character, and he certainly leaves an impression on young E.G. McConnell.
We heard that General Patton was coming down to greet us into his army. As we were called to attention, he looked me straight in the eye with gray eyes and said, "I sent for this unit because I heard you were good. I want you to go up there and kill them goddamn Krauts. Shoot up every goddamn thing you see. This is war."
But as it turns out, Patton was merely masking an ingrained racism.
In letters to his wife, he expressed a real concern and lack of belief that Black troops could take on these combat roles.
He did not believe that the Black tankers would be able to handle the sophistication associated with the machinery of war. Excerpt from Patton's 1947 memoir, War as I Knew It, on the 761st All-Black Tank Battalion. They gave a very good first impression, but I have no faith in the inherent fighting ability of the race.
His viewpoints of African Americans fighting in the military were reflective of reports based on negative stereotypes.
There's an incredibly racist and disturbing document, the 1925 Army War College Report, called The Use of Negro Manpower in War. It made outrageous claims. It said, the Black soldier is mentally inferior to the white man. The cranial cavity of the Negro is smaller than the white. An opinion held in common by practically all officers is that the Negro is a rank coward in the dark. This isn't just the isolated beliefs of a handful of individuals. This was official Army doctrine. This is what they taught at West Point. That's what Black troops were up against.
They said we couldn't use tanks. We weren't qualified. We had to prove to the world that we could do anything that anybody else could do.
All the men who ultimately would assume high command in the Second World War, Dwight David Eisenhower, General Patton, they're all going to be touched by the prejudice that exists in that report.
I'll say one thing for him, though. Patton's a pragmatist, and in desperate need of tank support, he calls the 761st forward to face their first action. So here's the situation. Leaving the safety of the Allied-held area, the 761st must now push further east towards the German border. Vixasse is the first in a cluster of settlements they are tasked with liberating.
In this campaign, they'll be opposed by the Nazis' 11th Panzer Division. This is going to be the first test of the 761st. The Germans have been able to really create massive fortifications that the army has put in place for the defense of these towns.
The 761st are at the leading edge of the advance. Johnny Stevens will take his tank into action. And in the very first tank of the convoy is ammunition loader Floyd Dade.
First day in battle, everything tightens up. I guess you were nervous, you didn't know what was going to happen. They were sitting out waiting for us.
We know Johnny Stevens and Floyd Dade take up positions near the town of Vic-Sur-Seille. At the same time, E.G. McConnell's unit is tasked with taking the neighboring town of Bazinges-le-Petit.
It was pincer movement, each part of that pincer, both parts, that closed on these towns. But it's one thing to close in, it's another thing to subdue the enemy troops within.
They are literally within what is a fortified German kill zone.
Survive this day, and there will be 183 more days of battle to come.
November 8th, 1944, the jump-off is almost here. Only a couple of hours. I have smoked 2 packs of cigs. I am scared as hell, but if God be with us, we might come out alive.
Anybody that goes into combat and say he isn't scared, he's alive.
It was believed that as soon as the fighting started, that black men would turn tail and run in fear. In fact, on November 8th, 1944, it's the opposite.
Military records show that one of the 761st white commanders is shocked and retreats. Johnny Stevens and Floyd Dade push ahead. The unit's motto is "Come out fighting," and that's exactly what they do.
We just battled like hell. It was a suicide mission, but we just had to keep rolling all the time.
Fire!
The Germans had anti-tank weapons, good observation posts, and superior positions. But what the 761st was good at, they were good at finding these structures and blasting them. And this is what they had trained them to do, to maneuver and keep a steady aim on the target.
What the Germans also didn't count for were the human beings operating those tanks, those black tankers who were part of the 761st, who know intimately the ins and outs of the tanks, but also have a desire to really prove themselves in battle.
Throughout the day, U.S. forces launch a succession of thrusts at a well-concealed enemy. Dodging mines and a barrage of return fire, the 761st pick off the Germans' position one by one.
Fire!
Within hours, the 761st have driven the Germans out of the village. The Black Panthers have proven their point.
At the end of the battle, there's no question. Not only is the 761st ready, they're going to be a tremendous asset to the Third Army. Over the next few weeks, the 761st proved that November 8th is not an anomaly. They continue this amazing record, liberating town after town, being the decisive factor in battle after battle, and undermining the notion of their skeptics that they're unprepared for battle. Now they find themselves in demand from their white counterparts who desperately want the 761st attached to their unit because they've heard about the proficiency of these fearsome fighters.
Guys in the infantry told us they would rather have us with them than the guys in the white tankers.
I think it's important that we actually see with the battalion desegregation in real time. We see people who initially said these people are inferior, these people are less than, they're not deserving, saying things like, can I hide under your tank? Can we put them in a strategic position for this battle? Can we have them lead out this expedition? And so while it's certainly not perfect, it is evidence of the power of the war to change ideas about race and ethnicity.
But most folks back home don't get to hear of the 761st triumphs or of their acceptance by white infantry as brothers in arms, because their stories don't make it into the mainstream press. And if it wasn't for some bold journalists, their history might have been erased altogether. Embedded with the 761st, a war correspondent called Tresvan Anderson does manage to file articles with the black press, while others report in a US Army publication. And for loader Floyd Dade, these fragments are a vital record to hand down to the next generation.
What I have in my hands here is the Stars and Stripes newspaper article that had the title, Negro Tankers Cut Path for Third Army, and it has my father and one of his comrades. One thing my dad said is like, this shows that what I'm telling is the truth. Black tankers were there. We were in Europe, and this is proof of that.
The German High Command has committed at least 20 full-strength divisions to the winter offensive.
December 1944. To the surprise of the Allies, Hitler decides that he wants to do one major large campaign, over 200,000 men, over 1,000 tanks, attack the Allies in the West, and it creates this bulge dividing the British and the American armies.
And it is this offensive at the Ardennes, which eventually will become known as the Battle of the Bulge. If he can drive German forces to the town of Antwerp and cut off the supplies to the British, the French, and the Americans, he can force a retreat.
But General Patton has his own plan, a counterattack that will devastate the Germans. And he's going to rely on the 761st, who he summons 130 miles to Belgium to join the fight against the German advance. It will become a defining battle of World War II.
Tillet is this kind of otherwise insignificant town, but for the purposes of the Battle of the Bulge, it is supremely important. It is 12 miles west of Bastogne, a critical part of the Nazi supply line. The American military commanders believe that if the 761st is successful in taking Tillet, that'll cut off the German supply lines and it will drive German forces back to the original line. So, this is an extremely important moment, not only for the tankers of the 761st, but for the Allied war effort.
On a slow, treacherous crawl towards Tillet is Johnny Stevens. He's in charge of 5 of these tanks. In another tank nearby is ammunitions loader Floyd Dade. On the other side of the valley is E.G. McConnell's company.
Just getting to the town of Tillet for the 761st is going to be like the 12 tasks of Hercules in that area. The Germans have placed fortifications, pillboxes, dragon's teeth, self-propelled rockets. Patton had no delusions in sending them in that they'd actually return.
Johnny Stevens leads his tanks deep into German-controlled territory, where he'll face enemy tanks with a fearsome reputation.
The 761st is up against the Führer Begleit Brigade. There's no question that these are the elite of the elite. And there's also no question that the 761st are operating under even more brutal conditions and with even higher stakes. The region is experiencing the coldest winter in over 30 years.
It was terrible. You're freezing, cold. You haven't seen the light of a fire in a month. Your feet were frozen. You guys are sick. It was just a bad thing up there.
The weather certainly played to the advantage of the Nazis. Almost zero visibility.
Germans had white uniforms. They would raise up out of the snow. And they would fire on us. By the time you find out where he is and spot the fire on it, he'd move to another place and start firing.
The 761st protect the thousands of American soldiers fighting alongside them, including the men of the 87th Infantry Division.
The 761st and the Infantry Division. They couldn't see anti-tank guns that were concealed in the woods. And the Germans were firing 2 or 3 self-propelled guns, very powerful weapons.
When these smaller Sherman tanks would come up against these Tiger and these Panzer tanks, it was not a fair fight. The Allied tanks were probably more mobile, faster, but they didn't have the armament and the firepower that the German tanks had.
All hell has broken loose here in Belgium. They are throwing everything at us except Hitler's dress suit.
Day 2 and Johnny Stevens and Floyd Dade's company have already taken up an attack position on higher ground just outside of Tilley. When the 87th Infantry advance towards the town, they encounter heavy fire.
The Germans that evening are able to wipe out a large number of the 87th Infantry Division.
The German was up on the ridge, and that was a place like a soup bowl. Once you get down in there, you can't get out. Those guys in there, they were like a line of ducks. The Germans just slaughtered them.
War records show that the 87th Infantry suffer heavy losses.
My father heard that the soldiers had gotten killed, and he felt deeply about losing these men. They stuck by each other through everything. So to lose them, it had to be like losing a brother.
As the Battle of the Bulge rages, the U.S. Army is slowly driving the Germans back, but suffering many casualties. Around Tilley, the Nazi defenders refuse to yield.
The 761st really are in an untenable position, not knowing what lies beyond the next ridge, not to mention what lies or what's waiting for them in the town itself.
I don't know what date it is because we have been so busy fighting, we have forgotten about dates and times.
They're fighting by degrees. And as they move closer and move back and move closer and move back, that dance now has them face to face with their partner, but on a very shortened dance floor. After 5 days, they're so close, they literally feel like they can reach out and touch the enemy. And so it really, at this point, degenerates into tank-to-tank combat.
Enemy tank, inbound!
Guns themselves for the German tanks were bigger and stronger. So they hit an Allied tank, it was gonna explode.
It was all killing. Main gun fire, coax fire, anti-tank fire, small arms fire from both sides.
It hit about 25 yards from me. It was a mortar. I could feel the heat from that red and black smoke that I saw.
The 761st are now so close to the center of Tilley, but just can't make the final advance into the town.
It's got you pinned down. They're gonna kill you sooner or later. So you gotta figure out a way to get around it.
It's around this time that E.G. McConnell's tank and 9 others try to change the course of the battle.
E.G. McConnell went to work with the 76mm main gun, and he killed as many Germans as he could. And when they saw black smoke spiraling into the sky, they knew that they'd hit these German armored vehicles, and the more of them that they knocked out, the more precarious the situation of German infantry inside of Tilley became.
The 761st ultimately successful in pushing the Germans back. By nightfall, the 761st and the 87th Infantry Division had won.
In the process of liberating Tilley, the 761st lose several tanks and the lives of 5 men.
We have taken a beating, but whoever said colored soldiers can't fight is a damn liar.
And victory bears a heavy price for men like E.G. McConnell.
My dad, his battalion was hit severely. He saw his best friend killed in action. At the time he's telling this story, he was 81 years old. And he wept like as if it had happened that day. I never saw my father weep.
The strategic victory at Tilley blocks German progress and shatters their morale. Hitler's last major offensive on the Western Front is crumbling.
The Battle of the Bulge was the largest and deadliest battle that the United States fought during World War II. Churchill described it as the greatest battle America fought during the war.
The last major German offensive has been checked. Now, it's on to Berlin.
Next, our heroes in the 761st are sent eastwards. They punch a hole in the Nazis' Siegfried Line, opening the way for the American advance deep into Germany. They take dozens of German towns and cities. And there's an inescapable irony here.
The German soldiers were so imbued with racial superiority, they couldn't countenance the idea that a black soldier could defeat them in combat.
All 3 of our heroes survived to see victory in Europe declared on the 8th of May, 1945.
My father was very happy when he heard that the war was over. There's even a picture of him where he had his finger up, like, we're #1. He said, I'm so glad that we defeated Hitler.
This is the picture of my father in Germany and other members of the 761st Tank Battalion. This picture is special to us. He was happy when the war was over because he was ready to come home.
Returning to the USA, black soldiers held out hope for a warm welcome. But of course, that just wasn't the case.
When my dad returned from Europe, no parade, no fanfare, no thank you, nothing.
One of the big differences between Black Americans and white Americans' experience of the war is that Black veterans weren't treated as heroes when they came home.
We see massive incidents of racial violence and racial terrorism that is directly aimed at World War II Black veterans. Men could be lynched for wearing their uniforms because the uniform, it is a badge of citizenship. It is a badge of equality. So how dare you desecrate that uniform, right, and upset the racial order by wearing it?
To add insult to injury, Black veterans' enormous contribution to the war effort is being erased, excluded from official narratives and history books.
In depictions of the war, they're telling a story that is built on this idea that Black people don't exist. This helps us understand the deliberate and calculated nature by which African Americans were written out of the war effort.
761st members said, I stopped talking about my wartime experiences because they couldn't believe that there was a Black battalion that did all of these things.
They weren't accorded the same acknowledgement that white troops were. That was hurtful, and that's why it's so important to bring those stories back into the center of the story we tell about the war today.
They did something. They did something that was really special. And you have to recognize people's achievements. And it's like I'm wearing those medals on my chest.
Like all Black vets, E.G. McConnell could not understand why his heroics were hidden after the war. This is rare footage of him filmed before the 50th anniversary of the war.
We were so very, very much involved in the Battle of Bulge. Yet no mention has ever been made of it.
My father had a studio that was invite only. He would bunker in there for quite a while, and Mom had to bring a tray up to him for his meals. Truthfully speaking, I don't think World War II ever left my father's psyche. A lot of times he suffered silently. It was something that came up every day.
This is a 1938 tanker helmet. E.G. McConnell gifted it to me, and it means everything to me.
I'm extremely proud of my dad. It makes me proud that he was a part of that history, and it wasn't told, and I wish that he got his story out more.
What shocks everybody I've talked to about the story of the 761st is that they haven't heard about it before now. It was hid so long.
Imagine everything you went through, the sacrifice and the bloodshed, simply dismissed.
We do have servicemen who say, you know, what did I do this for? How has this changed my life? I think more important, however, is that for many of them, it is the spark of radicalism that completely changes who they are.
World War II really sets the stage for the civil rights movement. There was like the whole generation of Black veterans who can become civil rights leaders.
Now, for many of us who've gone overseas, fought for this country, fought for Mississippi, we fought for Alabama, and we fought for every state in this union.
What's happening in the United States for the fight for equal and social rights is happening in Africa, it's happening in Asia, it's happening in South America, it's happening in India.
This decade is the decade of African independence. Forward then to independence now.
In 1964, the US Congress passes the Civil Rights Act. It's meant to protect against discrimination, but the reality on America's streets is different. It's left to the kids of veterans like Carol to pick up the baton for equality.
I became involved with sit-ins. I became involved with rallies. My generation had a lot to say about the Vietnam War and apartheid Africa.
Watching these moments through the years, the call for social equality and the end of violence towards black people resonates just as loud today. And we draw strength from those who went before us.
We recognize that in the lives of others, we often find hope and inspiration. Not solely because they achieved great things, but they did so against tremendous odds.
I am so proud of the achievement of that whole generation.
They're heroes, and their stories deserve to be elevated and not erased. There's always these doors shut on knowing the truth, and you see it now. And I think that keeps this country so separated. We all bleed, we all cry, we all suffer, we have joy. We're all human. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. When kids are exposed to real Black heroes, it makes you feel differently about yourself. That's such a beautiful legacy.